All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew, and we're excited to have you in the latest entry of our MVP digital webinar series, Data and Infrastructure Security. I am joined by today's host, Stuart Eves. He's going to be walking us through some of the technology best practices we've got and can give you some tips to help out with your infrastructure and data security. Before we get started, I just want to point out, if this is your first time joining our webinar series, down at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A button. If you have any questions throughout the show, don't hesitate to open that up and ask us. We're going to save some time at the end of today's episode to review your questions and follow up. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Today's sponsors are 36 Picks, Amidon Graphics, Marathon Press, Perfectly Clear, and Richmond Professional Lab. Thank you so much for supporting our series and the MVP conference. And with that, I'm joined by our host, Stuart Eves. He is our VP of Technology. Stu, take it away.
All right, thank you, Andrew. All right, so today we'll go over a few things here. First, I'll start off with a little introduction about myself, and we'll talk about kind of what is cloud security and why it's important. And then we'll move into some of the security practices we use here at ImageQuicks and PhotoLinks, and then we'll wrap things up with tips for studios. All right, let's get started. A little bit about me. I've been with ImageQuicks since 2008. I met the PhotoLinks team last year and was super excited when they joined. It's been quite a fun adventure. A little bit about my past. I started with my computer journey when I was quite young. My dad sold computers, and I used to play a lot of DOS games and program my calculator. So basically, my whole life I've been a nerd. I went to ECPI University for network security. I got an associate's degree in that. That was about 15 years ago. Interestingly enough, a lot of those core principles still apply today. So it was kind of a nice little thing for this. And then in 2009 is when I switched over to become a full-time software developer after working in the IT and security space for a few years. Quite honestly, I haven't looked back. Being a developer is a lot of fun. But that's quite enough about me. So let's dive into some security. So why is cloud security important? It's quite a buzzword. And quite honestly, as our world continues to digitalize, the amount of information that's out there is just absolutely staggering. This is both a good and a bad thing. You know, we're obviously a cloud company. We like the cloud, but it also attracts some bad people. So in 2018, there was some data breaches. It exposed about 500 million records across 1,200 or so data breaches. In 2019, that number rose quite dramatically to 4.1 billion records in just the first 6 months. And interestingly enough, cybercrime is estimated to cost our world about $6 trillion by 2021. This is a graph of the National Vulnerability Database. What this shows is it shows the number of reported vulnerabilities that are basically what we call known vulnerabilities. And they're graded high to low. That's kind of irrelevant. But what you can see very clearly in this graph is that the number of exploits and vulnerabilities that are all throughout the software ecosystem has dramatically risen since 2017. So what exactly is cloud security? Obviously, it's important. There's a lot of big numbers in that previous slide. So basically, I really like this definition that McAfee provided. And it's cloud security involves the procedures and technology that secure cloud computing environments against both external and internal cybersecurity threats. Now, there's a couple things I really like about this definition. First, it's not only technology to protect us. I'm obviously a nerd, so I like that side. But process is also part of it, how we handle our people and those type of things. And it really calls out the human element as part of this. Why the human element is really important? About 34% of all data breaches involve internal actors. So it's one of those, we think we have friends, but apparently 34% of data breaches disagree. So that's kind of that. I'm gonna move on to how we handle some of that here at IQ and PL. So we're going to go over some high-level ways we approach security. We're going to start with technology in particular in this two-sided coin. And we're going to wrap up with the process. So in technology, I'll try to not go too deep. I am a nerd, so please bear with me. It all starts with kind of system design. One of the fundamental things about software is what we call architecture. And what this diagram kind of hides a lot of that complexity, but it's just a really high level way of kind of showing you how we approach the problem. And really what I'd like to call out is that we focus a lot on how data comes into our system, and then a lot about how data flows throughout our system. We carefully design that process, starting at the entry point, kind of working our way backwards. And then part of that is we're able to filter traffic through various different layers to prevent malicious intent. Some things that are kind of important to call out here is we use public and private networks within the cloud. A private network basically means we can't connect to it directly, so I can't get on my computer and get into that server. I have to connect to it via something else that's hooked through the public. So it kind of shows how we try to tuck as many things back in that private, non-internet accessible kind of network. We really try to focus on doing as much of that as possible. Another big thing you've probably heard in the news, it has to do with another S3 bucket had a bunch of millions of records in it. There's a lot of configuration problems that can happen. Luckily, Amazon has started to clean up a lot of their practices. But one of the things we do is we make sure that we audit our S3 buckets and make sure that we're not publicly exposing your valuable photography. Cool. All right, so we're going to move on to code. So we kind of have how we want our system to look. Let's talk about how we code it. There's a lot of common attacks out there. You might have seen some of these in the news as well. Various types of injection attacks, cross-site attacks, these type of things. We use a lot of open source libraries and frameworks. And the main reason behind that is not because it's cool or whatever. It is pretty cool. But really, it's about standing on the shoulders of giants. So if Google's contributing to a particular piece of software that we're also using, we're going to have we're going to get the benefits from their security researchers and those type of things. And we do a lot of that. We use a lot of open source to help protect us against these common attacks. But part of open source is you do have to keep libraries up to date. As new security patches come out, we do very frequently review them. Some of our tooling even tells us that we need to go update things, which is really cool. And one of the things that we really try to focus on is, especially in the security realm, if you spot an issue, you have to fix it immediately. You can't just let, especially security issues, sit out there. That's kind of how we code. So let's move on to some of our infrastructure stuff. Infrastructure is a fun subject. This is really where the cloud comes in. We really start with how we set things up. So we have lots of little components. In that original diagram, you saw there was lots of little squares, multiple APIs, some background processes. And one of the things we try to do is we try to create unique keys or credentials that these things use to connect to the various services. So for instance, with the Plick integration, we have a special IQ kind of set of credentials that are specific to get that Plick integration working. That means that we can actively revoke and do other things and manage these things independently, which is really nice. Another thing we try to do as well is we look at what's called least privilege setup. We basically restrict our components to exactly what they need. For example, like not every service needs to write images into our where your photos are stored, our S3 storage. So what we'll do is we'll remove that ability to write into S3. So a good example would be like a thumbnailer. I need to take an uploaded image, I need to downsize it, watermark it, do some other things. I make sure that process that does that thumbnailing can only read images. It can't necessarily write back on top of them. So it's part of the least privilege setup again. And lastly, how we configure our systems is also super important. Those keys and credentials that I talked about a little bit earlier, we have to secure those at runtime within our system. We don't just want passwords and various things floating around out there. So we use an encrypted configuration system in all of our systems. The PLIC team has gone a little bit further in the infrastructure than the IQ team, and they've addressed another common concern called data residency. This is probably near and dear to our Canadian and Australian clients, which is super cool because our PLIC products are available in Canada, Australia, and the United States. So that's a little bit about our infrastructure. So we have code, we have design, we have infrastructure. Now, how do we deal with that when we run our code? So this is a really fun section. This is, for me, one of my favorites because it's really, you get a lot of cool charts and graphs out of these tools, but they actually help quite a bit. Cloudflare is a really fun technology, and it provides many features like caching and some other things, but it has a really sweet security feature where it uses AI to actually analyze our traffic to see if we're actively under attack. Well, it will also block attacks when it senses that we are. Cloudflare is an industry leader in this field, and we love using it. Another tool that we rely quite heavily on is New Relic. New Relic does a lot of things around anomaly detection within our traffic and various error alerting. Basically, if somebody's probing around in our system, they're probably causing errors and those type of things, and we're likely to get an alert. Some other things we do are long-term logging. And so our application logs out a lot of things. Different applications log different things, obviously. But this basically gives us a long-running history of these application-specific issues as they arise. So if we have an alert or another thing, we can go back to the logs and kind of do some forensics. These are critical. However, they're not always as used as the other systems. All right, I just kind of blasted through our technology a little bit here. I'm going to talk about some of our process and people stuff we do. All right, so within our people practices, ultimately security itself, due to the staggering metrics out there, security is really successful when the team fully embraces it. If you have people that don't like it or don't like various practices, the success goes down dramatically. Luckily, all of our engineers really care about this particular subject. So some of the basic things we do are we don't share user accounts wherever it's possible. Everyone has unique credentials. It's pretty similar to how we think about our infrastructure as well. A system or a person, they're just an identity. And so we try to make sure that our passwords are unique in our systems. And we use a lot of systems, so I would advise to use a password manager. Some of the other things we do is we use the multi-form authentication where possible. So when we log into our cloud, we have to go through a couple layers before we can even get access to it. We have to have our physical device, we have to have our passwords, et cetera, et cetera. So we enable this wherever possible, and specifically all of our cloud providers. Cool. So that's some of our people practices. Oh yeah, of course. Again, like the services, we pull those roles down as little as possible. So people like Andrew don't have access to the cloud. He doesn't need it in his job, he doesn't get it. He can use Blueprint and those type of things. Cool. So another practice we do is we have to go back and we got to take a look. And sometimes, you think you did it right during the time, and then you go back like 6 months later and you're like, ooh, maybe I could have done that better. So that's something we try to bake into our process, is that look back. A while back, we created a developer checklist. We were doing some hiring on the IQ side. And what this did is we included all the systems that we had to provision accounts for. And that allowed us to quickly onboard the people. Interestingly enough, we had one of them leave. So a strange side effect was we're able to quickly offboard by going backwards on that list. So it was really nice. I know offboarding has been happening around the industry. So this is one of those things I thought might be nice to be able to start looking at. I would also suggest doing this frequently, during the off season, if you have a couple lulls, maybe in the winter and in the summer, you can take those moments, as you're getting ready, adjusting your workflows and doing all these other things that go on during those seasons. This would be a nice little one to just kind of make sure you understand who has access to what. We had to go through this in both IQ and PL. And another weird side effect was that once we saw all the systems we were running and who had what, we were able to pretty quickly understand our cost. As you can imagine, merging two companies together can be a little sticky in some places. So this really helped understand, oh, we have redundancy in this system. Maybe we should consolidate. Maybe we should do that. So this can be another good exercise to understand your cost as well. And then lastly, you always have to plan. You don't want to get caught red-handed. And it's a very sticky subject because you don't always know what you're going to get caught by. So it's really important to understand what your options are, including planning for worst case scenario. So one of the things here is we actually have gone through 2 of the fire drills where some of our systems threw up an alarm, and we noticed some awkward traffic that we couldn't really figure out, but it was isolated to just a few different IPs. So we were able to quickly detect those, and because we had thought about this before, we were able to quickly block and get them away from our system. So this is one of those, like, I call them fire drills, but we still have to remain vigilant just in case any other threats may arise. Another cool thing is with tools like Cloudflare, we can actually put ourselves in active attack mode, and that allows us to challenge users before they proceed to our apps. And they basically think like a CAPTCHA type thing. That's what this type of challenge is. All right, cool. So let's talk about how we measure some of that effectiveness. It's a lot of things we got to keep track of. So how do we know if we're doing well or not doing well? Well, one thing we do and we try to maintain is we use an industry standard technique. ImageQuicks is PCI compliant. We have to renew this yearly. PCI basically ensures that we handle credit card information safely and securely. Every quarter, we go through a vulnerability scan. They try to break into our networks. And if anything ever arises, we have to fix it immediately to maintain that compliancy. And we recently renewed this. So this is kind of what that looks like. This is our third-party vendor that does this for us. Cool. All right, another thing we do, so that's kind of like our quarterly active, what I call our active approach to it, or proactive approach even. Another thing we do, another review cycle we go through is with our parent company, ASG. And they use the group CTO over there, really cool guy, Jeremy Jackson's his name. And he came up with something called the minimum viable technology framework. And this framework consists of a few different things. It's really based on Amazon well architected. And what that does is it asks us a bunch of things around operational excellence, application design, security, and a few other categories. It's very intense. It takes hours to complete. But at the end of the day, we get graded. And we have to maintain a minimal score within our portfolio. So it's us and every other ASG company out there has to go through this same thing. What's neat about it is a little bit of a pain, but what's super neat about it is it actually gives us a simple A, B, C. Are you doing A? Are you doing B? Are you doing C? And if we're like, well, we do A and B, then I can measure C next time I take it, and hopefully I can improve. So it kind of gives me a roadmap and a lot of bullets to go fight those fights that I need to do to get up to those scores. It's really nice. Cool. That's it for the technology side of it. So really, technology is about common practices, training people and certain people practices, and then lastly, constantly checking on yourself to make sure you're still keeping up to those practices. So that's kind of the theme there. So let's talk about some of the things we can do for the studios, or some of the things you can do. Sorry. I hope that last section wasn't too dry, by the way. So I'll try to lighten the mood too. So we'll start with this. Security training, it's awesome. Woo! All right, so when we're looking at our processes at a studio, one of the things we can do is we really need to understand what our requirements are. And those requirements, they can be pretty vast. Our schools and clients may have certain requirements, like data residency and those type of things. You may have sensitive data that you're handling, like student IDs. How are you using those in your workflow? Those type of things. Do you have long-term data needs? Do your clients say you got to hold on to it for a certain amount of time? So more stuff here is we need to we need to look at our requirements, and then we'll go through and see what we actually have and see if we're even getting close to the mark here. So again, this is very similar to what we did. It's kind of go run down all the systems you use in your business. Who's the administrator, who are power users in there, really kind of look at that. And double check that you're using encryption as we're moving student data around. I wouldn't want my kids' data getting out, so this is another critical one. All right, now I know what you're thinking. You can't fail an audit if you don't take it. So let's talk about after we do this audit. All right. So again, a lot of common themes here. It's around shared credentials. If everyone shares the same password, that person leaves, or your business is struggling, you have to lay them off. How are you going to handle that security issue? And obviously try to create unique users for that. In Blueprint and Click, you can create unique users and handle them. There's another one, another thing that, especially in small business, I find can happen frequently is what I call bus factor systems. If this person gets hit by the bus, can anyone else do it? And it's a terrible way to look at things. But again, if they get laid off or something like that. I was working with the studio a couple weeks ago that was the scenario. And they were having an internal kind of conversation in front of me. And they were asking, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to do that? And they actually had just laid off the only person that knew how to do that. And so it was just a big fire drill about go figure out how to do this, how to do that, who has access. So bus factor systems, especially in this critical time, I really try to identify those and remediate those as quick as possible. Cool. Some other things we can look at here are users and groups. Try to identify those common themes in our business. We want to look for too much privilege. Everyone doesn't need to be admin. If you're a photographer, might not need to do everything that, say, some of your in-house studio people might do. That's not true of every business. Some are smaller, some are bigger. Depends on your resources. And really, if you are, medium to larger, you might have some common roles. Say you have a customer service department, or your photographers are, you ebb and flow, how many photographers are on staff depending on season, and those type of things. So you can look to create those custom roles throughout your system. That's Gmail. You can do groups and stuff and give access to documents for those groups. You can do this in Microsoft Teams, whatever. Try to find those common roles. In Blueprint, you can also create those roles. If you need any help with that, feel free to reach out to support. We can't talk about users without talking about passwords. Justin, one of the PhotoLinks developers, sent this to me, and I couldn't resist putting it in here because I've never done that. I have a beautiful dog, and nope, this never happened. Cool. So I would suggest using strong passwords. Again, especially in mission critical kind of systems, look to create unique passwords. There's an interesting thing if you use LastPass or like Google Password Manager. If your password's ever been hacked, it actually will pop up and tell you this password's been compromised. If they were able to find it in like a data dump or whatever, and they'll ask you to change it. So think about that. If that popped up for you, how many systems would that affect? You don't want it to be very many, especially your critical ones. Another thing is I know multi-form authentication, getting texted the code is really annoying, but for your mission critical stuff, turn this on where you can. It really makes it harder in case there is a password compromise somewhere. All right, let's talk about some data. So we deal with a lot of data in the high volume process. We get subject lists, we get lots of images, so we really got to look at how we store those in the long run. I'm a firm believer that student and consumer data should be stored in a safe, limited way. A good example would be not every customer service person needs to get the raw data from the school. So if they have access to it, they probably don't need it. Now, somebody creating jobs and uploading jobs might need that information. In fact, they probably do. So it's about finding that least privilege kind of setup here. And of course, for disaster recovery purposes, not just for security reasons, but other reasons, if you're doing in-house data storage in the long run, I would suggest doing an offsite backup. There are some things that can help out here, and they'll help out in other things like Citrix Share File and Dropbox Business can really do that. They focus on those type of things. So let's talk about how we move data around. Email is just not secure, so don't do that. Cool. So what can we do? One of the things is data should be encrypted when it's in motion, is what we call that. So if you're uploading subject data or uploading orders to a lab or something along those lines, then that data should be in an encrypted while it's being moved. So what that means is don't use email, avoid FTP, prefer SFTP. So if you're using FTP, that's all that data sent in clear text. If you're sitting in a coffee shop doing that, anyone in that coffee shop could read that data pretty easily. So prefer the secure version, SFTP, that encrypts the data while it's in motion, or you can use a third-party vendor. Again, this is like a Citrix Share File or a Dropbox Business, where they have a lot more compliancy involved in their process. I did want to point out though that click and image quits, when you're uploading data to us, we use SSL for everything, and all of our traffic goes through HTTP. So that's where, and more precisely, it's HTTPS with the SSL side of that. So all of our traffic is encrypted while it's in motion to us. Cool. Another thing is we need to talk about what data we gather as well. I would be real wary of accepting sensitive data such as social security numbers or date of birth or credit card numbers. I don't think anyone needs my social security number to print a 5x7. So if you're collecting it, we try to avoid it at all costs. If you have requirements in your business, then you also need to think about the security behind these sensitive things. I've also heard of collecting credit card numbers on handwritten statements. This is a very insecure practice. So I wouldn't do that, but just try to shy away from those type processes. As a general rule, we just don't want to collect things that we don't need. Largely, it reduces our liability in case there is ever a breach, or if there's ever somebody internally leaks some of our data or something like that. We just want to reduce our overall liability, and by not collecting any more than we need. And then, important part about credit cards, we process millions of orders a year here at ImageQuicks and PhotoLinks. We don't even store credit card numbers. We use third-party vendors to process that, like our banks and various merchants. We don't store any part of the credit card information. What we store is we store a transaction ID so we can link it back to the merchant. But the merchant has, those things, handles all of the sensitive information. All right, so we've looked at a few things we can improve on after we kind of audited ourselves and audited our requirements. An action plan is kind of what's up next. Really, it's about creating goals and processes to really help iterate and move things along. And I use the word iterate because I'm a big fan of incremental improvements. If you noticed anything previously, and this is true outside of the security realm too is, if you want to change something in your business, the bigger the change, the harder it is. And whether that's the cost of it, the retraining of that, or even potentially, some of the personal feelings that may get involved because they've always done it a certain way before. So the smaller the change, the easier it is to accept. So I try to focus on small, frequent changes. And another thing, we try to use some of this thinking too, not necessarily in the security context, but it's also easier to do new things with new work. So if you want a couple extra schools this year, or you're planning on having a stellar sales season leading into the fall, you could try out some new things within those clients. So maybe you were using FTP, you could try out Dropbox Business or something with those clients to put them at ease. It's a little easier on future work. Cool. And lastly, improvement is always a journey. There's always something we can do to be better at. Just like we do in our yearly reviews, we have a minimum score. It doesn't mean everyone gets a maximum score. So there's always those things we can get a little bit better at. And I'm a big fan of the lean methodology. I know it's more software based, but I think it applies in just about every business. And it's the build, measure, learn loop. It's basically you just constantly go through this. So a small incremental change, you use Dropbox, did it work for these few jobs? Yes, no. If the answer is yes, can you do more jobs? Yes, no. You can kind of do this like build, try it out, see if it didn't work, why didn't it work, take that learning, put it back in the cycle and try again. So that's that build, measure, learn, repeat loop. Big fan of that. And then if you have any questions about this kind of stuff, feel free to reach out to the PhotoLinks IQ support if you need any assistance. Woohoo! Thanks for listening to me talk about a very fun and exciting subject. We'll take some questions now.
Awesome, wonderful information, Stu. And again, thank you so much. And everybody, just to point out again at the bottom, we have our Q&A button. Feel free to type in, ask any questions. See, we've got some that are popping up here. So, Stu, we've heard a lot about the internal side of security. What about some client-facing security options? And currently within Blueprint, we have gallery passwords. What are some other security steps that we can take to ensure that secure access for the customer?
That's a good question. For the consumer, it's kind of, you have gallery passwords and you also have the online codes. So that's kind of the two security components that are there. I know in the, I'm not as familiar with the PLIC products, but I know using like PLIC organizations, you can tailor some of the security within that. So if your schools are logging into the PLIC products, you can restrict some of the stuff they do there.
Awesome. And speaking about the security with Blueprint, has there been any plans of adding in two-factor authentication?
There is currently not at this time. It is something that we are aware of. Sorry, Vince. I see your question.
And then can you have any recommendations for a third-party vendor or third-party software for transferring encrypted data between clients?
Yeah. So there's a company that started here in Raleigh that I'm a big fan of, so I'll promote that a little bit first. And that's the Citrix ShareFile. It was bought by Citrix a couple years ago, but it did not start as a Citrix product. And they actually are HIPAA compliant, so you can even transfer some medical records through there. So they take security super serially. Sorry for my joke. And then things like Dropbox Business. Dropbox didn't have a really good start in the security field, so they doubled down on it, and Dropbox Business can do that. If you're more technical, you can always use one of the cloud providers. But if that's not an option for you, I would go with one of those previous two. And the last question, seems more secure for there to be users and accounts instead of online passwords. Can we expect that change? We've received that question a few times. One of the things that we are looking at is we're looking at Vando as a whole. We're doing some really big analysis this year. Uh, I can't promise anything around that, but it is a common request. And yes, I agree, they would be more secure. Any other questions? Oh, yep. Scroll down a little bit. All right. Will you be able to send emails from Blueprint soon? We have marketing emails available in Blueprint if you talk to your CSM.
Yep, and of course, support would always be happy to initiate and get the conversation rolling on those as well. But we always strongly recommend partnering with our marketing strategists or your client success managers in order to kick off those emails and marketing campaigns. But I think at this point, I think this is going to wrap up our data and infrastructure security webinar episode for our MVP Digital 2020 series. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in and listening. Stu, thank you for the presentation, and we will be sure to have this uploaded for future viewings. With that, I think everybody, we want to wish you a wonderful Wednesday, and please stay safe.